Peace and love, brothers and sisters. Welcome once again to an edition of the Cosmo Ill Show. But this is more like a message or an announcement. I'd like to talk to you about some information that's in a recent book that I published. And it's called Moors and the Great Civil Rights Conspiracy. And I wrote this book for a very particular reason, because there's a body of information, a body of knowledge that it's not hidden, though it is obscured. And what I mean by that is it's in the history books, but it's obscured. And it's obscured because, first of all, they've changed a lot of the names. And this act of changing the names, redefining and reclassification of things is terrorism. It's linguistic terrorism. It's cultural genocide. And it's the erasing of the true history that would not have us caught up in this situation that we're in right now. And it's a very grave situation, and we've been in it for too long. But what are the origins of it? Where can it be traced to? That's what this book deals with, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Because you have to read the newspapers and pay attention to what's going on in the world politically. Even though we know that this is a de facto system, you still have to keep up with the politics. You have to know that under the guise of Negro, Black, and Colored, a targeted population under these chattel brands, Negro, Black, Colored, Indian, or whatever name they invent, that is going to be managed by the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. And they control the chattel brands. To this day, they're a department that rose out of the census, or a bureaucracy that rose out of the census, which was also used in the past to reclassify the ex-slave population so that they could keep them in perpetual slavery via these terms, these legal terms of Negro, Black, and Colored. And that's what the civil rights movement is all about. We have to understand that. Nothing more and nothing less. It's all about keeping you within the Civil Rights Act. And now the Civil Rights Act come in the mid-60s. 1964, 1965, Lyndon B. Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act. And this is supposed to bring you out of the second-class citizenship that you have been existing in since slavery. But has it worked? In fact, one could argue that the situation is often worse, because it's shrouded, and they keep perpetuating this false concept of progress for so-called blacks in the United States, and they indoctrinate it into the children in their schools. And these children grow up as adults thinking that they're free, or that so-called blacks have made progress. But I'm going to show you, and I'm going to show you how, and prove to you right now that there has been no progress made. And inside this book, I go into some very crucial historical references. You need these historical references to be able to better understand this situation, because they have everybody hoodwinked. They have everybody under this cloud of who they are, and it's really very simple. So you have to understand, first of all, that the Civil War was fought because the South did not want to give up their chattel property. They did not want to give up their plantation system. People were becoming plantation rich. Cotton was king. they did not want to give up their slave population. Now, there's also a free population, and most of the time when they talk about free blacks, primarily more so than blacks, free persons of color, you assume that a person of color means that they're black. These are two different classifications. Person of color has more connotations to it. More connotations indeed. Now, persons of color was dark. It wasn't limited to dark people, but you can see all kind of people throughout history. Some of your grandparents were persons of color, and they're just as dark as you. Just like today, people are labeled black, and black covers so-called mulattoes now. Light skin, from light to dark, black covers that now. So same thing with person of color, but person of color was closer to the original. Person of color had more rights than the so-called black or the so-called Negro. Most persons of color was free. Most of them, they'll tell you, were mixed with so-called Indian. This is only because they were indigenous, and they're trying to explain to you how somebody dark could be a so-called Indian, and it must be that they escaped off a slave plantation, or they married, or they mixed in. And this is important, and that's some of the history that I go into, with the Moors of Fort Sumter.
2 centuries ago, when the United States was a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the conditions prevailed in the nation, and the assumption on which its foundation were built was such that they ensured that the United States would come to its maturity under circumstances which mean that for a substantial proportion of citizens, life is nothing more than a living death. Liberty is nothing more than a prison of poverty, and the only happiness we enjoy is laughing to keep from crying. We find evidence for majority freedom and minority oppression in the fact that even while the early settlers were proclaiming their freedom, they were deliberately and systematically depriving Africans of their freedom. These basic contradictions were further aggravated by acts which implicitly admitted that the majority was wrong, but unwilling to do right. Thus, when the Declaration of Independence was drafted, the Founding Fathers struck all mentions of the slave trades. Thus, when the United States Constitution was drafted, the Founding Fathers considered the slaves as equivalent to 3/5 of the man. Thus, when the slaves were emancipated, the descendants of the Founding Fathers compromised that freedom to gain further territory. These compromises were so basic to the thinking of the forebears that legal attempts to correct the contradiction through constitutional amendments and civil rights laws have produced no change in our conditions, and we're still a people without equal protection and due process of the law. We recognize then that the oppressive acts of the United States government, when contrasted with the testaments of freedom, carries forward a basic contradiction found in all the legal documents upon which this government is based. Generation after generation of the majority group have been born, they have worked, and they have seen the fruits of their labor in the life, liberty, and happiness of their children and grandchildren. Generation after generation of black people in America have been born, they have worked, and they have seen the fruits of their labors in the life, liberty, and happiness of the children and grandchildren of the oppressor.
Anyway, segregation came about after the Civil War as a system of governing that ex-slave population that they didn't return to their birthright like they were supposed to. A compromise was made to keep that population subjugated and oppressed, economically, socially, politically oppressed, and second-class citizenship. through segregation, a de facto governing system. The whole system is de facto now, but if you look at, say, that the United States or the North, the United States was legitimate and the South, which was segregated, is illegitimate, it become a de facto governing system. And some of it wasn't even de facto. It was written in different laws, different codes, black codes, things like that. But even after, when they weren't supposed to be following all that stuff, it was still a de facto governing system. And it was all the way up until the so-called civil rights movement. Now this is where the conspiracy comes in. Because the civil rights movement, first of all, the emancipation was supposed to take care of the population of slaves so that they would no longer be slaves. It didn't work because of segregation and because of the different compromises that were made and because of the reclassification and labeling of the ex-slave population to blind them, to keep them perpetually participating in their own second-class citizenship, in their own second-class, in their own slavery. But does the Civil Rights Act, does the Voters' Rights Act, does any of this stuff end this de facto segregation? Does any of it end the economic, social, and political oppression? Has any of their steps that they have taken made conditions better on a whole for the whole population of so-called blacks? And I think you know the answer to that. Case in point, in 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court made a decision that certain aspects of the Voters' Rights Act was unconstitutional. Now, these very sections of the Voters' Rights Act, the argument has always been from the Southerners that this civil rights was unconstitutional. So here's the Supreme Court ruling that certain aspects of it are unconstitutional. The most important aspects, the very thing that integrationists and those of the civil rights movement claimed as victories, have been taken away since 2013, and so-called Negroes, blacks, and colors as a whole know nothing about it. And yet it's these same sections that are allowing the same states that were under the Civil Rights Acts because of segregation and because of the oppression, outright oppression. It allows them to do what they're doing back with voter registration again, voters laws, restrictive laws for voting. All right, the primary right of a citizen is to vote. That's the main right. So that you can help shape your environment, help shape your government, help shape the communities in which you live, to help bring about a higher quality of life, to help bring about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, has the Civil Rights Act done that? And yet, these same leaders will have you, they're about to have a march right now, coming up soon. I don't know when exactly it is, you can look it up, but they're marching again. All these movies with Selma, all this throwback to the 60s, they're just trying to get you right back in the frame of mind so they can re-enslave you again. And now, guess what? CNN tweets today that O'Malley, he's one of the candidates for presidency, the new de facto ruler of the U.S. corporation. He's running on a campaign of voters' rights amendment. All right, so here we are back full circle, 2015. They want some amendments, some constitutional. You have a presidential candidate running on a platform for voters' rights, constitutional amendments for so-called Negroes, blacks, and colors. Nobody else. When you get the right to vote, you can vote to the day you die. When you become a citizen, when you are a citizen, you are a citizen to the day you die. Your children are citizens even if they're born in other countries. So, that's what this book is about. And it goes into some, it's good information to have. But primarily, take a look around you, brothers and sisters, because they're bringing it now, 2015, they're bringing something, and you're going to have to willingly participate in it, or you're going to have to go ahead and realize it's time to have your own. It's no more time. You need to proclaim your nationality and get with your nation, or you can continue to be a part of this Negro buck down show and get you some more temporary rights and thank the so-called white man for allowing you to be a part of his de facto government as a second-class citizen. Or you can get with your nation and start building your own and come to the table as men and women. Same skills you have now are the same skills that you're going to have when you get with your nation. So you either need to develop or use those skills when you get to your nation with as much or more diligence to uplift you and your people. Family, tribe, community, nation. See, there's some events that took place in Ferguson where the young brother Mike Brown was killed right around the corner down the street from Dred Scott's grave, right on the Mason-Dixon line. Little while ago, the whole world's attention was focused right over there in Ferguson. And you saw Moors coming into the forefront of something. And now you don't see that anymore. And see, why don't you see it? This civil rights junk is a distraction. That Confederate flag stuff, that's a distraction. The way they're exploiting what happened in the church over there, that's a distraction. That's taking the focus off of the real issue. We was real close over there with Dred Scott. And that's where our minds need to be. And that's why they take your mind way off somewhere in South Carolina and start talking about a Confederate flag that they take down and then put up the original flag of the Union, of the Confederacy. The flag that they had when they decided they was going to pull out of the Union because they wanted to get rid of slavery. That's the flag that they were flying. That's the flag that they had before the war started. It turned to the battle flag. They started using the battle flag. But that government, those original 7 stars, they're flying the one with the 13 now. But the original 7 stars are the original 7 plantation-rich states that pulled out of the Union. That's what those stars represent. And the 13 stars are the excess over 7 stars are the ones that tried to pull out and tried to secede but weren't successful, but they still get counted. That's when they subjugated the Moors in totality. And then coming out of slavery, they subjugated you again, the Moors, with segregation and the taking of their titles for these classifications of Negro, Black, and Colored, and have been doing it ever since. You had a Civil Rights Act, Voters' Rights Act and Civil Rights Act. How many so-called black people know that the so-called voting rights that you have right now expire in 2031? Most people don't know that, but they're running around here thinking that they're full-class citizens, and they're about to start marching down the street again and trying to recreate Selma in 2015 and sidestep the issue of human rights and the denationalization of Moors, which is the source of all human rights, human rights violation. It is the root of all human rights violations taking place regarding the denationalized Moors, the targeted population known as so-called blacks. I hope you guys enjoy the book. I hope you guys enjoy the little bit of information that I'm sharing in this announcement. And we'll talk soon. Peace, love, all the above.
Yeah, my views on a lot of things are my views that may be contrary to what other people believe, or the Ku Klux Klan per se were not set up by the lower class of Caucasians. The lower class of Caucasians were recruited into the Ku Klux Klan by former rich plantation owners who saw a way to gain some of their property back, and they used prejudice ideas, class ideas on these ignorant low-class Caucasians. You know, the act of giving each free slave so many acres of land, and then the Ku Klux Klan scared them off it. You know, you see, these poor whites that was the body of the Klan didn't gain nothing, because the land went back to the rich owner. You know, it didn't go to them. But it's just showing you how man manipulated, you know, their own people.
Vacations.